Hello, welcome to the lecture on Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, or more commonly, just Friedrich Nietzsche. That's five consonants in a row. I don't think I've ever seen that many consonants in a row. And his name gets said Nietzsche and Nietzsche, but the German is Nietzsche. It's the an E at the end of a German word like the car Porsche or um, anyway. Let's see. So he was born in 1844, died in August 25th, 1900, and so he almost made it into the 20th century. 1901 is the first year of the 20th century. Here we go. So who was Nietzsche? He was born the pious son. I mean, he wasn't born pious, but he was raised to be the pious son of a Lutheran minister. But tragedy struck when he was very young, about 4 years old, I think, and his father died when Nietzsche was a small child. So Nietzsche was raised by his mother, his grandmother, two aunts, and a sister. He was considering following his father into the clergy, but he developed some misgivings about his faith, and he started studying philology, which was the study of the ancient Greek and Roman and biblical texts. Um, And he was very good at it. He made a real impression on a professor when he was a student, and the professor called him a phenomenon, and had high hopes for him. And they made him a professor at the age of 24 at the University of Basel. Uh, but it didn't work out as well as they'd hoped. His Nietzsche had poor health. Um, he had stomach cramps. He was nearly blind. He had terrible headaches, and on and on. Very sensitive digestion. I'm not going to speculate what exactly these medical conditions he had were. Um, So 10 years later, when he was 34, he retired from teaching, citing his health problems. And when he was a teacher, he didn't live up to the hopes that had been uh, expressed by this professor who called him a phenomenon. The students loved him as a lecturer before he was a professor, but when he was a professor, he sort of lost his gusto for philology. Um, and once he was free of teaching, he devoted his time and his whole life to his own writings. So he was able to get a small pension um, due to his having taught, and that's what he lived on. His books did not sell. He had to pay for them to be published. And he lived in rooming houses in Switzerland and Italy and beautiful places. And he hiked in the mountains. He had a ball type typewriter that he would that he may have taken up into the mountains, but I think generally he used pencil and paper. Um, so I also think that in a situation like the chapter in this book on Nietzsche, where his work is largely summarized, although I do uh, find some joy in seeing how much of Nietzsche's own writing is included in the chapter. However, I still think that when we talk about Nietzsche in PowerPoint bullet point uh, terms, what gets left out is Nietzsche's deep humanity and humaneness. And the impression, even in this textbook, I think, that gets made upon the reader is most likely one of a man who had no pity, wanted the tough guys to rule the world, and hated everything good and loved everything evil. Nietzsche was much more subtle a thinker than that. And um, I included the aphorism for the discussion on um, punishment because the book focuses on punishment and on Nietzsche's saying that uh, modern culture gets so sick that it even uh, feels as if it needs to be nice to people who harm it, to criminals. And there's there's talk about punishment. Well, Nietzsche wrote from many different perspectives throughout his writing career. And it's hard to find something he said without also finding a place where he contradicts that. Um, so I wanted to put that this apparent contradiction in uh, for us. So aphorism 321 from his oh I guess it was around 1880. Um, in the 1870s, I think, The Gay Science was published, also called The Joyful Wisdom. And this humanness, this humaneness and humanity comes through, I think, in this aphorism. So one thing I'll also say about Nietzsche as a person and as a thinker is that I believe that if a person has not extensively read Nietzsche, their opinion must be taken with a huge amount of salt, for reasons like the ones I've just given. It's easy to make a caricature of Nietzsche, and many people have read him badly and made him the basis of what they hope to put over on other people. So let's talk about Nietzsche's thought some more. So he said he philosophized with a hammer. Now this sounds like one of those tough guy things, but it's not. He used the hammer to tap on an idol, the metaphor of an idol like God or morality or objectivity or science. And you tap on it with the hammer, and if it sounds hollow, well, then maybe he would smash it with that same hammer. But if it was solid, he would let it stand. So this metaphor is him examining these idols, these old idols that we have had for sometimes thousands of years. So it's not just that he went around wrecking everything. He wasn't a bull in a china shop with his hammer. He did deny the existence of objective reality. He talked about how there was just appearance and there was nothing behind it. But as I said, one must be careful when summarizing Nietzsche. There's probably a place where he expressed the opposite. Um, his what is called his perspectivism, it amounts to everyone having a perspective and nobody having an objective view. That's the one true view. And he himself demonstrates this in his own writing by writing from different perspectives. And which one is his true perspective? Well, even his friends said he himself was like his writings in this way, that there was more than one Nietzsche. Uh, that sometimes he would be a certain way and sometimes he'd be a different way. And all of us are multifaceted to some degree. But I think the expression of people who knew him personally was that he was particularly multi-sided, where um, he almost had different personalities. I'm not suggesting he had dissociative identity disorder. I don't believe that. That's not what I'm suggesting. So he criticized modernity a lot, and he said it was a sickness. He said it was decadent. Modern aspects of culture were decadent. And when he talks about modernity, big in that picture is morality based on Christian morality, even if it's secular Enlightenment morality. Um, That's still based on Christian morality. And he had a lot to say about that. Um, So decadent in his use of the word means decay or decline. He's not talking about like throwing a party with like gold leaf on wedding cake and then just throwing that into a swimming pool or something just totally absurdly decadent. Something very sensuous and wasteful and exorbitant and expensive. So when Nietzsche talks about morality, he questions its source, he questions where it came from and what its purpose is. And he sees this development of Christian and modern morality as coming from a clash between so-called master morality and a so-called slave morality that developed in opposition to it. So he's not talking about like slavery in the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s in America. He's not talking about the transatlantic slave trade. He's not talking about people who were enslaved. He's talking about people who are slavish, people who are obedient and uh, dominated by other people and uh, don't really have any power, uh, and maybe don't even want it. And people who might like um, um, not not trying hard things. Um, Whereas the masters were people who um, were satisfied with themselves and they were good at things. And for them, they saw themselves as good and they saw uh, the slavish people as, just not good, just bad, but not evil. Nietzsche says that evil was invented by the slavish people due to their ressentiment, um, which is the French form for resentment. And this ressentiment was, well, you don't say the T, ressentiment, mo, and you nasalize the N. Um, mo, and um, the slavish people didn't like how they got treated by the master people and they were resentful and they couldn't take out their anger and resentment in action because they were weak and they were powerless. And this isn't, again, this is not a real master-slave relationship. This is just sort of two types of people. Um, and so they redefined morality, where good is what they were, and evil was what they weren't. It was what the masters were, the masterly people were. He talks about the death of God in The Gay Science. He has the parable of the madman who comes into a town and says, God is dead and we have killed him. Are we, worthy of this deed? And he's saying, are we not plunging through, you know, space, without direction and without purpose and in the parable the madman comes in and there are atheists there who laugh at him because he's saying I seek God and he's got a lantern that's lit in the daytime and supposedly this was done by I think Diogenes who said I'm seeking for one wise man. But anyway, and of course Nietzsche as a philologist would have known about that story about Diogenes, the Cynic philosopher, ancient Greek Cynic philosopher. So he believed that with the death of God, we need to reevaluate all these moral values that are based on God's authority. And he wanted to set up a new morality based on his ideas that he thought were uh, better for human flourishing, better for life, better for happiness and joyfulness. So I'm putting this here. We have killed God with optimism. And I read the chapter, and I've read a lot of Nietzsche, and I've read some. commentary on Nietzsche, and nowhere have I seen it said that oops, that he said we killed God with optimism. It may be in the book somewhere, but I missed it if it is. And so I put it in there just because it's on the reading quiz to be helpful to you. So Nietzsche was critical of a lot of things. He was critical of Immanuel Kant. He was critical of religion generally, morality, um, especially modern morality. He was critical of the idea of there being an objective reality. Not only maybe the idea of there being something behind the appearances that we experience. There's no thing in itself, maybe. But also his perspectivism in that nobody has the so-called God's eye view of things that is the one true way they are. And he was against scientism. He was very critical of elevating science as the only way of knowing things. And this was very a very popular idea, scientism. I have to admit, I myself was an adherent of scientism when I was much younger. And he probably would not have gotten along with the new atheists of the 2000s and early 2010s, um, who were generally adherents of scientism, like Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, um, uh, Christopher Hitchens, and Sam Harris, who has developed himself into a spiritual guru. Um, he was one of the so-called four horsemen. Um, anyway, Nietzsche was a very spiritual person despite his atheism. And yeah, he was an atheist. He taught me a new way to use the word spiritual that I'd never come across before. And I found that very valuable to me. Just reading his books throughout, the way he uses the word spiritual as separate from religious. And here he he means spiritual as a quality completely separate. Well, it can be related to religion, and by religion, he doesn't only mean organized religion the way many people today use the word, but he's talking about like worship of a god as being considered religion, whereas spirituality might have more to do with Buddhism or Taoism. Um, and he was a wonderful writer. He really was. I really encourage you to read Nietzsche himself. A lot of his work is done in short bites. You can dip into it anytime and come right out of it. And it's not that every aphorism is independent of every other one. And they often he'll pursue a theme with several of them in a row. So there is some structure to it, and he does write longer essays, and he writes poetry and songs in um, uh, the gay science. And he puts himself into his writings. I really got the impression that I had met Nietzsche when I was done reading 10 of his books. Um, so that is what I will leave you with. And happy reading, happy studying. Nietzsche may not be what you've heard. It may not be what you've read. He he may not be what you've read. His writings may not say what people have told you they've said. Is that we all have different perspectives on things, as Nietzsche said, regardless of the existence of objective reality or not. So thank you very much, and I will leave off here.